In 1859, Charles Darwin launched upon the world his astonishingly simple idea, and he did that in just 2 sentences. As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as, consequently, there is a frequently recurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new and modified form. That other great genius, Albert Einstein, once famously said, "Simplify everything as far as possible, and then stop." But how simple can we make the essential principles that form the foundations of the story of life before Albert advises us to stop, when even the simplest cell we can find is an amazingly complex and well-organized chemical factory that could not have jumped spontaneously into existence? Once again, Darwin leads the way. It is often said that all the conditions for the first production of a living organism are now present which could ever have been present. But if, and oh what a big if, we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric salts, light, heat, electricity, etc. present, that a protein compound was chemically formed, ready to undergo still more complex changes. At the present day, such matter would be instantly devoured or absorbed, which would not have been the case before living creatures were formed. Therein lies the realization that, at the start, simplification is not merely permitted, it is mandated. The cell is far too complex, so the process of the evolution of life could not have started with a cell in the primordial chemical soup in the oceans of the early earth. But, as subsequent science has discovered, a molecule that could make copies of itself is simple enough to appear spontaneously. Darwin's insights have stood the test of time, and they can be further distilled to form his 3 preconditions for evolution by means of natural selection to occur. 1. Heritable reproduction. 2. Variation. 3. A struggle for existence. In his reference to any being, Darwin reminds us that this formulation is quite general, so we can easily model such an entity in a computer. Heritable reproduction, we now know, requires genes, and our modelled entity has 2, an X and a Y. Reproduction is by cloning, to produce another entity that inherits the genes of its parents. Variation occurs because the reproduction process is subject to random mutations. So, in our model, a randomly selected entity, XY, can result in another XY, X plus DXY, XY plus DY, and very rarely X plus DX, Y plus DY, where dx and dy are small perturbations. This is a simple model of an SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism in biology, otherwise known as a SNP. In order to model a struggle for existence, we need to let our model entity loose in a very dangerous habitat. As yet, there are no predators because there are no other life forms. But there are factors that limit the size of any population. Reproduction requires materials and energy, and these are of limited availability, thereby limiting population sizes to sustainable levels. This is a simple fitness landscape, and we can use it to perform a series of experiments that amply illustrate many important consequences of Darwin's brilliantly simple idea. It doesn't represent geographical positions, it represents in the XY plane the two genes of our simple organism. The Z coordinate in the space represents the fitness corresponding to the organism's ability to survive and reproduce in any of the 4 habitats bounded by the red lines. In part 2, we can alter the terrain, seed the habitats with a single model organism, and then fly around like the gods themselves to examine the subsequent motion.